Welcome to EpiSTEM podcast. This EpiSTEM podcast is brought to you from the National Centre of STEM Education at the School of Education in the University of Limerick. I'm your host, Geraldine Simmie, and I'm the Professor of STEM Education here at the Centre and the Director of EpiSTEM. And my co-host,
Michelle Starr, and I am the Research Liaison Officer in EpiSTEM.
Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm here with my co-host, Michelle, and we're going to talk to you about, I suppose, an introduction to the area of research that we love the most, critical sociology of education and critical sociology, for me, of STEM education. I think what we're looking at, Michelle, here is looking at maybe an introductory podcast on if somebody wanted to do a PhD or maybe even a master's in this area, how they might go about it. So all we'd be doing really here today is having, I suppose, a chat about the various sections of such a study and maybe looking at it that way. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, we have discussed this and it is great. It'll be very, very helpful and very helpful. I mean, I would have loved it at my own PhD when I was doing it a few years ago, and for our students now, our PhD students. And I even find it's helpful in myself, even when we're talking through this, in putting the whole concept in your head, or trying to formulate how you want to project it and to explain it, which is, and you have to do it by talking like this.
You do.
Talking, and we're not going to get it right. Well,
no,
I won't.
No,
I mean, you've lots of experience in this area, though, in supervising and PhDs and examining PhDs, if you want.
Well,
to.
I mean, I'm learning all the time as well. Like since I completed my own in 2009, I've submitted about 12 that have gone through to completion, and I've examined about 19. But I'm always learning myself as I examine PhDs. I'm always learning, and I'm really, I suppose, trying to learn it to such a way to be able to say it really clearly. And I love the way we work in a research team in EpiSTEM anyway.
Yes,
we have six PhD students at the minute, and we're always chatting and having that conversation. So it's nice to get this opportunity to just take the space and look a bird's eye view first. And then we'll talk about the theory and about the policy part a little bit better. So for me, a bird's eye view is if I was coming to examine a PhD, I'm looking for, I suppose, clarity and coherence and joined up thinking between all the chapters. And in the introductory chapter, I'm looking for somebody to explain the problem to me that they're studying, the social, scientific problem that they're studying, to explain it clearly. And of course, if they're coming from a critical sociology of education, I want them to be able to understand their positioning in that. For me, that positioning is about trying to explain something in the here and now, in the present, and the critical piece is about, I suppose, that asking who benefits and asking the awkward questions about society and the way we look at it.
Yeah, it really is. It's delving into it. It's that critical, and that critical brings in that delving in, isn't it?
Yeah.
About how did this come about? What's the history of it? Like who, as you said, who benefits?
Yeah.
And it's like to understand where it's about the power within.
So it's kind of got power and privilege and politics in there. And I love the moral and political philosophers as well, because they'll ask the questions deeper. And what I love about kind of critical feminist work that I've sort of grown to love is that it kind of looks under the bonnet. It kind of looks a little bit underneath. It doesn't just take it as the mainstream approach. It kind of looks in the awkward spaces and in the cracks and spaces there as well.
Absolutely.
So we move on then from the introduction. Somebody's clearly laid out their positioning for the problem they're looking at, how they're defining it, and then it comes to their theoretical framework. And maybe we're going to draw that from your work. You're an expert in Bourdieu.
Well, I did Bourdieu in my sociology of education study, which I was looking at the time. There was a policy practice after being implemented in 2013, and it was parent choice of schools, which was type being patronage, because there was a strong change then or there's a lot of discourse for change within the patronage school system, and I'm talking in the level of primary school. So I wanted to look at what's going on in this and how policy is implemented. So my study it's funny how it started off because it's policy. And I just went straight away, I'm going to do Foucault and look at discourse analysis and the power within the discourse analysis. And I spent my first 2 years of my PhD, which is a long time, with the Foucault's theory. And then I realised when I started getting my data in, when I was interviewing parents, because the concept all along was to interview the parents and see how is this practice, how is this policy practice working on the ground. And I realised I couldn't interpret the data because it was very banal. And Bourdieu was my framework. I had
so
to
when you
turn
found
to,
when you found Bourdieu, what was the difference between Bourdieu, thinking with Bourdieu?
Yeah.
What did it do? Like, I mean, what is it that he had there in his theories that gave you that?
Well, I suppose what it's doing, it's a combination of Bourdieu's theory and the theory of practice, which I would use. It's that interplay. It works between structure and agency. So the individual and the system that we're in, and we're in a lot of systems. We're in the family, and he calls it the field. So we're in a lot of systems. We start off in the family. We then move into
School,
we're part of a community, a school. We're part of a nation, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, intersecting in that is social class, your capitals that come in. So what Bourdieu is, he incorporated all of these, but more so as well, it's how you can explain what this field, which I was examining, education system, what it was doing as well within the pulling and how it was pulling
and the pull and the tug.
And in the whole process, then it's just looking at the banal, and it's the banal that works within culture. Culture is very powerful, and it's what's legitimate. I can go into detail of that as I move along.
And I suppose like what Kathleen Lynch would call the hidden curriculum.
Absolutely.
Bourdieu and those intellectuals, the French intellectuals, they were great to say that left to its own devices, that schooling will just reproduce an elite.
Absolutely.
And so and the reason it does it is because a lot of it, the way it works, is hidden from us.
Yeah, it's the norm. It's within our society, because we're all born into something. From the moment we're born, we learn, and especially we learn how to categorize things and how to order things in our head, and that is the framework for our construction of everything. We how we perceive things, how we think, our feelings, everything. And if they're habituated, which is your habitus, these dispositions within your, where you grow up and your social class and your ethnic identity and your gender. I mean, it's all there. It's all there.
It's all there,
and it's and then how you're interacting within a system who has a culture that, and using Bourdieu's this theory of practice, you can then identify. You have to identify the culture, within the field, what's going on in there, and that is through critical analysis of history.
Yeah, so you're making sense, you're interpreting, but you actually have the tools, I suppose. Yeah. He gives you the thinking tools. So thinking with Bourdieu in a study gives you the thinking tools. So whatever we're doing across the theoretical perspectives in PhD studies that actually have are actually in the field of critical sociology of education or STEM education. They all have to have a theoretical framework, and they require the researcher to position themselves and to think with somebody or to think with more than one. I tend, as I've grown through the years and learned more, I tend to, if you like, I love innovative spaces anyway, and I love the cracks myself in between the critical pedagogy field and the feminist thinkers. I kind of love, I suppose, if you like, dabbling in what I'd call that interspace between those two fields, because they're two traditions that haven't actually joined forces, and we need them in the world at the moment.
Yes.
Kathleen Lynch does a very good job in Ireland. I love all her work and equality of condition and the way, she'll look at things. I like Freire and Bell Hooks and Maxine Greene. And I like Nell Noddings on her care. I loved her work being the philosophy of relationship, because I believe educating and teaching is relational rather than in just, I suppose, instructional or just interactional. I don't believe in it like that. I believe it's much bigger than that. So I love her work drawn from Martin Buber's work about the I, it and the I, thou. In other words, understanding I suppose the I-it piece is that a lot of what we do in classrooms and in policy is instrumental and functional, but there is an I-thou piece which must recognise the dignity of the human and immeasurable pieces. And that's what I love writing about. And I've done a recent research paper with Joanne Moles on it. We love actually trying to put in that piece into what is a framework that's missing the immeasurable, even the spiritual, but the aesthetic, the ethic, all that. A lot of that is not measurable. We live in a world nowadays that's trying to measure everything. But I think we're like a drunk man at times. The drunk man story of the fellow under the lamppost. Yeah. And he's trying to find his keys, and they're asking him, where's his keys? And he's saying, well, they're here. They must be under the lamppost because that's where the light is. So I think sometimes when we're overdoing metrics and data, that we sometimes miss what is actually the ethical value, the moral value of something. We miss that.
Yeah.
And
it is important, you're right, because it's always about asking the questions. And if you're doing a study as well, it's about looking, what are your questions, you pick your interests, and as you say, you develop your position, and that is developing your conceptual framework for your study itself. Yeah. But I love the way you intertwine all these different theories. Yeah. I think it's amazing that you can do that. And who are you inclined to, when you're doing an educational or critical sociological study, who would you?
Well, the person who has taught me most about integrating it all is Donna Haraway. She's a biologist from some part of the New Zealand or Australia or that side of the world. And she talks about staying with the trouble. And I like the idea of staying with the trouble, because in the world we're in today, we look for quick solutions and we look for coming with a kind of a one-sided approach. And I like the idea of staying with the trouble. So we have the vertical knowledge and we have the horizontal knowledge. We have the individual as a person becoming in their own right. And we also have an interplay between theory and practice and research and policy and all that. I love the idea of not only just putting it in, calling it complexity science, but being careful and understanding that outside of science, ethics and values and all that, we can't just shove them all into a box where we go too narrow. I'm afraid of a rigid orthodoxy that tries to see it all as staid, because democracy is a moving, shaping, changing. We're all changing. We're all human becoming. We've problems in the world now, and we really want to be able to educate young people to get out there and make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. And the narrowing it is important, not to narrow it.
Yeah.
I say, to broaden out your look and how you're analysing it as well, to see what is happening within that topic you're looking at. And I love that Donna Haraway's concept of staying with the trouble. There's a lot of trouble in there.
There is.
But and to stick with it.
And I suppose you're not asking a master's student to delve that deeply into their theoretical perspectives.
Yes.
But you would expect a PhD student to have that grasp at a theoretical, a conceptual level. And so they can use that lens to look down then on their data and whatever, and to come up with some new knowledge, because after all, at the end of the day, they're going to have to find new knowledge for the academy, and possibly and hopefully something that will make a difference to policy. So if we move away from the theoretical framework, then obviously as we do a little run around and look at this, we're looking for, I suppose, that the person would have a literature review done. They'd be able to explain what kind of one they did, but what would you expect to find in there?
What I think the literature review is just look at it. It's to look at it as in, it's position yourself within the academic literature. And to do that, because to decide to do a PhD, you obviously has an interest in knowing about something that's going on, some concept or something that's going on, and they're asking question. So the question is, what's going on here? And then about reading the literature on that topic area and broadening it out, you have to get a feel of, well, what's been done, what is said within that area in the research field, and look at it nationally, internationally, and to understand what has been said, what has been done, and then when you're reading the literature, you'll get an idea. One gets an idea of, how this is the methodologies, how this area, how you collect the data, where you and then you'll get to see as well, the theories that are used, and and you might see, you might see a broad array of theories being used and how to analyse, because you have to be able to analyse that data and understand that data.
Yeah. And that can be a critical interpretation, or can be any discursive analysis, whatever way you're doing
and
it.
the literature review helps you as well, because
it tells you what's going on around the world.
Yeah, and you get to see what's going on, and then you begin to form your own opinions after. It's very messy. It's a lot of writing, a lot of reading, and getting familiar with your topic.
Yeah, I think that's the bit that we're always working with our PhD students, to remind them that you kind of come at this in it's an iterative process.
Absolutely.
It's not a linear rational process. You're going round and round and learning. To be honest with you, I did more of my understanding of this after I had the PhD done than I did before, while I was doing it.
Yeah.
So the person will have somehow gathered an understanding of what's going on around the world. They'll be the world expert in this little topic, but we're always only being in a small part of a massive big field. And then we move on then to the research methodology. And obviously a PhD stands or falls on the basis that the key question and the approach taken and this research design is all aligned, and that the methods then are all making sense. That is all from top to bottom and sideways, it's all making sense.
Yeah, it's going to answer whatever the questions is, that the researcher wants to, which they have identified from their literature.
And then there'll be a decision about what data do I gather, and then there'll be a question of how do I do the analysis of that data.
Yeah.
So there'll also be a decision about the ethics of doing research.
Absolutely.
We have very nice materials here in the University of Limerick on how to do ethics, but we have very nice material in Ireland generally. But I think the British Education Research Journal, they actually have a special journal on how to do research in education and the ethics of educational research. They have a small booklet, and it's absolutely fabulous introduction to somebody to show them how to do the ethics of good research. So I think that one is like, for me, I always say there's three people to read up on this for critical sociology. It's John Cresswell, and John Cresswell. There's loads of others, but John Cresswell to me is the most wonderful, wonderful explainer of how to do research at this level.
Yeah. No, I agree, and you are. We sell Cresswell to our to the students. He's a great, because it gives great insight into how to approach your methodology. It's starting from the beginning with the literature review, and then how your theoretical framing. But and critically is then it works in on the different types of methods that are that you can do, qualitative, quantitative, and the different types within each of these frames are a combination, and the pluses and minuses, and it's always centered around the research question, which is important. And ethics is so important, and it's not just about getting your ethical approval from your university. It's having that concept of ethics throughout your research, and this is where we've discussed it with the PhD students, is about having a reflective journal. Which keeps us all that we are reflective of what we're doing, and constantly have that care.
Yeah.
And that's
and you're actually going to talk to that in a few minutes, because we're going to move on to the findings. And what I would say in my studies generally, and in our studies, we would kind of call these findings maybe critical insights, because we're not pretending that as researchers we're coming from nowhere. We're not pretending that we're actually so divorced from the world that we're up in ivory towers. We actually see the world, seeing all the injustice and cruelty and inequality in it. So we're not pretending we're coming from nowhere, which is why for the researcher and for the examiner we need to lay out our position, and we need to do research. And Cresswell again calls it research with advocacy. So I like to do research that has advocacy for emancipation of human beings, transformative possibility. And I also like to have that research as research that makes a real difference to the world. And I suppose democracy for me is about going after the commons. What's the common piece in the world? And are we all responsible for making sure that we not only look after ourselves and our families, but that we actually have a responsibility to have a shared view of the world? So the state can't run away and say to you, it's over to you, the individual. And we can't, none of us as individuals, educated people, can say, oh, sure, it's nothing to do with us, that we have this shared responsibility for the planet and for our society. So findings for me come under three headings. Generally in my studies, students do empirical studies, do their questionnaires, do their interviews, do find out what people are thinking about that topic for sure. But they also do a reflexive journal, and they also would do for me a good policy analysis. So do you want to talk to me about the reflexive journal? Because I know that's an area you have a strength in.
Well, the reflexive journal, yes, it is important because it's about positioning yourself within your research, and it's not about just talking about yourself and saying who you are and why you wanted to do this, which, yes, of course, but it's more than that. It's also about examining your own, where are you coming from, what is your position within that field. For example, if you're looking at the educational system or the school system, where did you fit within that? Because the school system is a middle class culture, as we look at. So were you part of that culture? Were you, or were you, an outsider in the culture, and therefore you would have different feelings? And it's to identify all of those. So therefore, and to identify, and by doing that, you're identifying that, oh, this is why I didn't recognise those norms and I thought everything was banal, because I'm part of the system. If that is what you, and that's what I found, I'm part of this system. And you've to, and that's, so therefore you're examining your own self and knowing that you're positioned within and complicit, because at the end of the day, you don't want to, and you try not to create violence with what you're doing, the violence as
symbolic violence.
Symbolic violence is what Bourdieu would say, which is about you're just reproducing the status quo. What you're trying to do is crack open what is going on and identifying it there. And
lovely.
So you've positioned yourself within it. So that is, I suppose, my best way of trying to explain that.
And what it also means that, let's say, the kind of PhDs that we're talking about have is data trustworthiness. And so there's multiple approaches that the student has to use for validity. They don't have to be reliability, because it doesn't mean that you're going to put another person doing the same study and getting the same outcome and all that. It's not that way. It's a data trustworthiness with a rigour. And so you have to have an intellectual rigour in the study, but you are in there, you can be in there, you have a position, you are looking at it from a particular position, so you're able to share all of that with your reader.
Because all researchers are in the research that they research, their studies that they research.
Yeah, whether they like to admit it or not.
Whether they'd like to admit it or not, so because you're in there, you're shaping it in some way, and, identifying your scholars that you're following, the literature you follow, the theory, that's all part of the shaping how your analysis is shaped and your position within all of that. So yes, it is, and it's very important for ethical reasons as well, which we talked about.
So that gives it data trustworthiness. So I'll finish for a few minutes on, I suppose, what I would then regard as a very strong piece of evidence that would go with the policy analysis, because I would want somebody who was studying some aspect of STEM teacher education or STEM professional development, or any aspect that they were doing in either science or education, or in STEM education or STEAM. I'd like them to know, well, what are the policies governing what they're looking at, and where are those policies coming from? Because I'd like them to trace them all the way back to the international global world, and not just think that the policies were invented here at home. As I thought naively when I was doing my study between Ireland and Norway, I thought the Irish Minister for Education came up with all those reform ideas all off their own bat. But anyway, so not a naive view of policy, understanding it, but being able to critique it and being able to look at it in terms of being able to really give it a strong critique. So for that, I fall on the work of Stephen Ball and Meg Maguire from the Institute of Education in London. what I would say about them that they've done for me is that they've shown me that policy is enacted in reality and not implemented. Policymakers lead us to believe that it's made one place and done somewhere else, and then you go and test it. But actually, the work of Ball and Maguire and those tell me that it's enacted. So it's a more sophisticated approach that happens. The teachers interpret it, they translate it, they work with the students they have in front of them, they work in the context. And so the policy will be enacted. And therefore, we need to have a conversation with the policymakers rather than them coming to do a clean inspection of us. So it'd be a different kind of an evaluation. It would be a professional dialogue we would be having. They also tell me the importance of theory, which we can look at again another day. But I love the idea of theory being used to not only intellectualise the problem, but to sap power and privilege and to open up that question of who benefits. And it's also policy is not equal to practice. Those are important pieces for me, that policy is not equal to practice because it keeps the opening there for your own human development. It keeps the bigger picture. It doesn't give it all predetermined neatness that we try and get, that helps us to stay with the trouble and to keep it broader.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
I think it's very interesting. And I'd love to just go back. Can I ask you a question on the policy is enacted? I mean, that's, can you just tell me more about just how, what does that mean?
Well, what is the traditional linear rational thinking is that policy is made one place and is implemented somewhere else, and then the inspectors, if you like, come and evaluate it in a linear rational way. So the policymakers make it, they give it to the schools to implement it, and then they come and inspect it.
And then they forget that there's humans working in between, implement, in the whole messiness, of course.
The human assemblage, the whole lot.
And humans coming from different backgrounds.
And the needs of people,
absolutely.
and the need that schooling is to do with our spiritual development and becoming persons, lifelong learners and all that it's not all predetermined, that we're on a journey, that it's more a journey than a destination. And therefore, it kind of, somebody said to me, keeping the foot in the door, so we don't slam the door and give it as a rubric and say this is it. So the enactment piece is, policy is enacted. So it's an intellectual interpretation, translation, working with individuals, working with classes, working in the context you find yourself in. So it's a much more messy business, more sophisticated than it just being one lot making it and the other lot implementing it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh no, it does make sense, and it's very explained very well.
Like, I suppose if we had the expense of an inspectorate that then would be coming doing professional dialogue as opposed to just literally evaluating, did it happen?
Yeah. And the great thing about being in this area of STEM education and looking and in research, you can go in and pick an area that you're a discipline or a little practice that maybe policy is trying to change or has said it's going to be changed, and seeing how it's working within the classroom system itself, which is
so all that's left then in the study is to kind of come with a discussion, policy implication, whatever is needed there to kind of put a ribbon on it at that point. So will we put a ribbon on today's podcast then, and I'll just give a few shout outs.
Do please. No, that's great, because we can continue on this forever, but we'll come back to it.
We will. We'll come back in the new year to it, and this will be our introductory podcast to anybody interested in pursuing a PhD study in critical sociology of education or STEM education. So a little shout out today to the Irish Maths Teachers Association, wishing them well, every good wish for their conference this Saturday, the 23rd of November. And I see their guest speaker is Joe Bowler, which is a fantastic lineup entirely. So every bit good wish there. And our professional diploma in mathematics for teaching, the applications for that are still open. We're getting a very, very good response from that. And so that's wonderful. Okay, so we'll be played out today by Liam Broderick. Liam is from Abbeyfield in County Limerick. He's a fourth year, a final year BA in Irish music in the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance here at the University of Limerick. And Liam is going to sing for us a traditional song. it's actually from probably, I don't know, is it the 17th century or somewhere, about Irish-French connections. It's called Shularoon. He's playing the acoustic guitar. He informs me that Shularoons means walk, my love, or come to me, my darling. That sounds like it has romantic tones, but I think given the history of the day, it may have some historical pieces as well that we all better go and get learning. But in the meantime, let's listen to Liam as he sings Shularoon.
I would I were on yonder hill, it's there I'd sit and cry my fill, and every tear would turn a mill. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. Shul, shul, shularoon, shulga sucker, shulga cune, shulga doris agus eile glum. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. I'll sell my rack, I'll sell my reel, I'll sell my only spinning wheel, to buy my love a quart of steel. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. Shul, shul, shularoon, shulga sucker, shulga cune, shulga doris agus eile glum. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. I'll dye my petticoat, I'll dye it red, and round the world I'll beg for bread, until my parents do wish me dead. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. Shul, shul, shularoon, shulga sucker, shulga cune, shulga doris agus eile glum. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. But now my love, he has gone to France, to seek his fortune to advance. If he e'er returns, 'tis but a chance. Isca day to my Vorneen's lawn. Shul, shul, shularoon, shulga sucker, shulga cune, shulga doris agus eile glum. Isca day to my